You're listening to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast with Courtney and Brittany. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast. I'm Brittany.
I'm Courtney.
And today we are going to talk about relationships and disabilities and how that looks, especially when you have a child who's disabled.
Yes, there are a lot of nuances to relationships in your life after having a disabled child. And we're going to touch on a bunch of different things today and kind of dabble in what that was like for us and likely what it was like for other caregivers. Those beginning days when you first find out your child's disabled, a lot, if not all, of your relationships really shift. Things start to change, whether that's friendships, your relationships with family members. Really, honestly, for me, I have to say every relationship with even like a stranger on the street has been altered from having a disabled child. It really just kind of shifts things. Some of the things we discussed today you might relate to, you might not, but we're here to just talk it out and see kind of where we can help guide people and maybe guide ourselves.
I know Courtney and I spoke in previous episodes about the birth injury and the traumatic deliveries of our children, but we're going to kind of move on a little bit from that and talk about the early days. I remember especially when I brought Cyrus home from the NICU, it wasn't just my husband and I that really had to shift and adjust and deal with our own grief in terms of Cyrus's injury and the potential results that would come from that. We had to deal with a lot of other people's grief too. And that was really, really challenging in the early days. I think dealing with a lot of other people's grief really hindered me from dealing with my own grief. And I noticed in those early days, and it took a while for me to really see it, I tried to hold everyone else's grief for them. And it honestly stopped me from reaching the level of acceptance that I have now reached. I felt like I was walking on eggshells with everyone else. I'm the kind of person where I like to talk things out. It's the way that I process things. It's the way that I process trauma. And a lot of people didn't want to talk about it. They kind of wanted to live with their head in the sand. They didn't necessarily want to accept or admit the possible long-term outcomes that came from Cyrus's brain injury. And because of that, I was not able to openly talk about it. Openly talking about it is really how I came to a higher level of acceptance. When I was able to talk about it openly, I really had to watch what I said. Mm-hmm. Oh goodness. I remember even as Cyrus got a little bit older and we were kind of realizing, well, he's probably gonna need a wheelchair. I remember people saying, why do you want to talk about that?
Did you also get if you said anything like, oh, my child might need a wheelchair, or oh, my child will require a gait trainer to walk, did you often also get the response of, you never know what he can do.
Yes.
He might walk without it.
Yes.
He might not need that.
Yes. There was a lot of that.
It's like that deflecting sort of not wanting to really accept.
Yeah, it was that, and it was a lot of, well, why are you giving up on him?
I
got that a lot. Just push him.
Yes, like it's a failure.
It's a
failure if the wheelchair or the gait trainer is a requirement.
Yes, even with the G-tube feeding, I've had so many people be like, well, don't you want him to eat by mouth one day? And it's like, I genuinely do not give a shit whether he eats by mouth or not. If he wants to eat by mouth, I want him to work towards that, and I want to help him get the tools. If Cyrus does not care whether he eats by mouth or not, I don't care either. If he doesn't care whether he walks or not, I don't care either. I want him to live comfortably. I want him to have confidence, and I want him to have independence. And all of that looks a lot different for him than everyone else, but it doesn't reduce the quality of those things for him. So there was a lot of really walking on eggshells in those early
Yeah.
days. I'm saying all of this because I know a lot of people have dealt with this. I know a lot of people are still dealing with this. I know people who are dealing with this and their kid's like 16 years old.
Yeah.
And they're dealing with the grief of family members, of friends, because there's just this whole like, oh, I wish your child wasn't disabled. Oh, I wish life was easier for you. I wish this. You don't have to deal with that. And if dealing with all of that is hindering you from getting to a higher level of acceptance and a higher level of comfort, just stop. Stop dealing with it. Just realize it's not your shit to hold on to. You don't have to grieve for other people's grief.
No, 100%. And listen, you have choices. So when we're saying, hey, you don't have to deal with it, you can cut people out of your life, or you can choose to just not hear the things they want to say and ignore them. Or you can choose to dwell on it and continue to hinder yourself. Honestly, your life is turned upside down. You discover your child's diagnosis and you're just trying to keep your head above water. I imagine if you're in that situation, at some point you have reached a pinnacle with one relationship in your life that has been like, what is happening? Like, you're not on the same page as me. You're not seeing my child the way I want to see my child. And it doesn't matter who that person is, but you really do need to at some point make a decision as to what you're going to allow in your life. And sometimes that means cutting people off. Sometimes that means calling people out. Sometimes that means just accepting and letting it, under the bridge sort of situation where you're just like, okay, well, that person's just going to be like that. I can't change that person. It is what it is.
But then set boundaries. If you can't change somebody, you need to set boundaries.
Yes, correct. For me, I have experienced all these various different things we're talking about. And particularly, I love my mother with all my heart. But my mother was a huge challenge when Lena was born, when we realized that there was going to be a lifelong disability. But she would be like, I pray every night he's going to heal. He's going to wake up tomorrow better. And, I would see her 1 week and then like 2 weeks later, she'd be like, so he walks now? Like, I don't know how that works, but sure. I'm like, not really. I used to in the beginning just kind of ignore it. And then I started saying things like, well, whether he walks or not doesn't matter, and I would say these things to her. And I just kind of realized I didn't want to push her out of my life. I wanted her to be a part of my life. I really couldn't change that part of her. So I just kind of put my blinders on with her. Mm-hmm. But then there are people in my life that never stopped with that and kind of cut them out. I felt like for me, kind of picked and choose who I wanted in my life and who I didn't. And it's a tricky situation. Me talking about my own mother, that's really hard. Yeah. That's a really hard thing. That's the grandmother to my children, it's like, do I want to cut her out? Do I not? You fall into this really gray area sometimes, but you have to do what's right for you. Yeah. I think is really what I'm trying to say more than anything. And there's going to be people who disappear right out the gate, meaning like there's people in your life that the moment your child's disability comes around, they're just out of your life. There's people who stay in your life but have no idea how to handle it, and that's what kind of Brittany's talking about, where you're kind of carrying their grief and your grief because they're there for you, they want to be there, but they are also projecting their grief onto you. And then there's the people who are just there, get it, they're on the same page with you, it's like 3 different levels. Yeah, it's really hard to figure out your own shit when there's all this other shit.
Yeah. And you really have to separate it. It's not just the outside forces, but it's within yourself too. You really have to take a step back and think about what's being projected onto your child, whether it's from you as a parent or whether it's from others, right? And this was something that I dealt with a lot really early on, and I still have moments of dealing with this where I'm projecting things onto both of my kids, right? But especially Cyrus. I eventually realized that other people were doing that too. There was always a lot of, well, maybe he'll walk with crutches, as if like, well, that's the best case scenario, instead of a wheelchair. And it's like, but what if he's pushing himself to hurt himself? Or what if that just doesn't work for him? It kind of made me realize that a lot of reasons why I was hearing these things from others was because they were projecting this thought that walking is superior to using a wheelchair, or talking is superior to using an eye gaze device. And a lot of that is because people can't understand that the baseline that these kids have and what their childhood looks so much different than what our childhood looked like and what the childhood of families or friends looked like, that because that baseline is so different, people automatically assume it's worse.
Automatically.
And so they project this sorrow of, well, you're not going to have the same quality childhood or adulthood that I had because it looks so much different. I remember talking to family early on, and I remember just saying, I want Cyrus to be so proud of who he is. And I want him to be so proud of his disability that that's just part of him. That's Cyrus. And if family can't accept that, if friends can't accept that, if family can't become accustomed to the idea of him using a wheelchair, then don't be around. This is his life, and he should not have to feel embarrassed or ashamed or like he's not good enough or what he does isn't good enough. He shouldn't have to feel any of that because other people are projecting their shit onto him.
No, absolutely not. It starts to lead into also their social lives in those relationships, being included in things. You just got me thinking about how in most cases when we're with family and friends or birthday parties and stuff like that, or we're out, there's nothing that is accessible and inclusive for Lino. And it goes hand in hand with what you're saying, because there's still this divide of how people accept Lino and how they think about him and what they think he can or cannot do. It's a constant what can he cannot do situation. You're constantly smacked in the face with that all the time. I'm always under the impression he could do everything.
And me too. I was literally just going to say that. I was going to be like, with the right tools, with the
he
right
thoughts
of it, he can do it all. It takes a lot of extra work.
Exactly.
But he can do it.
But so many people, again, I'm not trying to hate on anybody, because I really do think most of the people in my life do everything with good intention. Yeah. But I think that there's just such a lack of cultural acceptance that people don't even know how to start to accept my child. Yes. They really honestly don't know that groundwork has not been done in society in most cases, right? And in most families, you don't have any experience with disability prior. Everyone around you is grappling as well.
Yeah.
It makes our lives so much more stressful when we're trying to also take on your load and trying to teach you and educate you and guide you. It's so much going on. And really, at the point of all of this, there is a child, and that child just wants to live their life.
Just wants to live their life.
Yeah, just have fun, and they just want to be a child. Our kids are really typical toddlers. When you really get to know them, they're typical toddlers.
Yeah.
They really are. And they have their tantrums. They want to play. They don't want to work. They want to, they're typical kids. And sometimes it is so hard. It's like pulling teeth to get the people around you to just see it like that.
Yeah, I remember I love his orthopedic doctor. His orthopedic doctor actually has a disability himself. One of the first times that we ever had an appointment with him, he sat me down and he was like, do not treat this child any differently than any other child. The way you're going to do things with him is going to look different, but you do those things and you do not treat him differently. Gosh, hearing that really early on was so good. It was so important. And especially coming from him, it was so important for me to hear that. Listen, we're 4.5 years into it almost. And I do think that everybody who's involved in our lives, for the most part, they work really hard to include Cyrus. I think a lot of that was, like you said, Courtney, setting the groundwork as parents. This is what inclusion looks like. This is how it's going to look. I remember for Cyrus's 4th birthday, we actually planned a bowling birthday party with just immediate family. And I remember being asked, like, well, how will he do that? And it was kind of just like, how does he do anything? Like, we figure it out and we make it work and we do it and it looks different than how other kids do it, and that's okay. And guys, bowling is shockingly accessible. Like,
I think you'd be surprised how many things are shockingly accessible. A little creativity, like you're saying, they could do it. It looks different, but they could do it.
Oh, it was so good. It was so good. Oh, it was a dino-themed birthday party. They had a dino, like, ramp thing to put the ball down. He was so excited. We ended up using his upsie for a little bit. And then when he got tired with that, he was in his wheelchair. And it was so good. And everyone kind of rallied around to include him. And it can be done in 4.5 years in. Like, we're doing it and pretty much everyone else is doing it, but it's a lot of groundwork. And it was a lot of advocating. And it was a lot of me saying, like, these are the boundaries we're setting as a family for Cyrus. If you cannot accept what his disability looks like and what it may look like long term, then there's the door.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have any external factors involved in my son's life that's potentially going to create this internalized ableism for him, that's going to make him think that what he does isn't good enough or he's not good enough because of his disability and what his life looks like. I mean, he is living a very wonderful, rich life.
Can we talk about how that affects everyone around him as well? Also him. Let's actually also isolate how that makes him feel, because to be included, to be able to participate like that, to be able to have everyone around him celebrate him, the joy it had to have brought him, that it brought you as his parents, you and your husband, that it brought Alden as his sibling, that feeling that all of you went home with at the end of that day is, I wish I could just bottle that up, because I know that feeling. And I would bottle that up. I would feel that all day, every day. It is so amazing to give that to Cyrus and to have other people be involved. Like, there's just no words to actually genuinely describe it.
Yes, yeah. I totally want to bottle that up and just keep it forever. And that night, everyone was on a high. We all went home and we had grandparents like calling and texting, and my sister was texting me, and everyone was like, we had the best time. It all happened just because he was included in this situation. And there was, honestly, there was never a moment that he wasn't included, because it got to the point where he was starting to bowl for everyone else.
He was taking their turns.
He was taking everyone's turns, and he had like this same ball he wanted to use every time. My goodness, it was the best thing ever, and it can be done as long as you just think about it and just put your mind to it.
I get that it's not easy. Actually, let me rephrase that, because it is easy.
It is.
Right? Inclusion
with
actually
work,
is easy. Yes. But the concept of inclusion is easy. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's not easy to be inclusive. That's not really what I'm trying to say. How I'd rather rephrase it is, I get that it doesn't always come naturally.
Yes.
From that perspective, and that's what you're just saying, is it actually does require work.
Yes.
We're not talking about rocket science, but it does require a little bit of brain power to think about the situation, the event, the environment, the people involved, the activity itself. You really have to actually sit and think about it, because you got to get a little bit creative sometimes. You know, it's not always going to be something that has already something built in or that you can bring to
immediately make it inclusive for a child like Cyrus or Lino. It is still actually quite an easy concept, but I do get that like it could be complicated trying to figure out how to make something that's not accessible and not inclusive. How do you make it inclusive? Immediately, your first thought when you think of bowling is actually not inclusion.
Right.
And I say this because how many times when you picture a bowling alley do you see disabled people in a wheelchair or using any sort of a mobility aid, anything like that? Bowling,
Right.
You don't. Mm-hmm. You don't see it often, right? I'm not going to say you never see it. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen.
Right.
But you don't see it often. And from that angle, it's not, I hate the word, but it's not normal. It's not like what you see in the world. So from that perspective, I do get why some people falter or don't put in the time or the effort. It's definitely tricky, but it's certainly easy.
It is. I think it's easy. I think it can add a layer of exhaustion onto the parents or the caregivers because you're the ones having to think of this and you're the ones having to think of how to make it inclusive. It takes a lot for us to have to step up and have to lead by example. I could easily say, and Courtney, you would agree, that before we had our kids who have disabilities, I very highly doubt we ever took notice to any of this stuff. So it could very easily be said that nothing really seems like it could be inclusive, right? Because, like, is anyone really paying attention unless they have to? I know I wasn't. And so it adds the layer of exhaustion, and I think that that's kind of why Courtney and I are driving this home, saying, you know, you can't deal with other people's grief on this. And it can all be done. It's gonna look a lot different. And that's okay. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's worse at all. You know, I feel like in a lot of ways, because things don't come so easily for our family with the inclusion, it's almost better, right? It's like you succeed at it. That bowling party was so good because we put so much work into it and we put so much effort into it. And we really had to do all of these things to have Cyrus right there up in center. It was so rewarding afterwards because of it. I mean, it was the best bowling party I've ever been to. And I've been to a lot of bowling parties. And so that's why it's just really important to not deal with anyone else's grief, because if people are really grieving over your kids' disabilities or who they'd be without their disability, then they're not seeing the capabilities that these kids have at hand in the given moment, right? I mean, Cyrus can't get up and walk across the room, but he can use his gait trainer like a champ, you know, and he needs some help bowling, but he can bowl like a champ, and it's like that was one of the best days of his life. And so if people are really holding you back because they're sad and they're grieving, that's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help you move forward as a parent. It's not going to help your kid at all. I think you just need to nip that in the bud.
Yeah, cut out toxic people.
Yeah.
On the other spectrum, I think for me, not that I'm carrying other people's grief in my family and my friends. I'm not really carrying their grief, but sometimes there's this, I guess I would describe it as like a hood over their eyes. Like we're just kind of pretending it doesn't exist. Does that make sense?
It does.
And hear me out on this, because there is a level of always feeling like the odd man out. Mm-hmm. And mostly because I get a lot of this feeling like everything around me in terms of planning and this and that is just so easy. And I'm always bogged down with so much thought.
Yes.
Like
yes.
You can't walk out the door without 1,000 thoughts.
It's crushing.
to ensure that you actually have everything you need, or that you're going to be able to give both your children the experience you're going to have, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And I guess this is a little bit what you were talking about, is that exhaustion part of it. You have to overcompensate for everyone when you're trying to like just live your life. Particularly what I'm thinking about right now is I'm thinking about my best friends. It is always such a complex situation. And it's not always ideal. I'm not going to lie. I love you girls to death. But it is not always ideal. And it's an interesting thing because for the first time, I felt really, really seen and really like this small little weight was lifted off my shoulders, because one of my girlfriends in our group, it's like a group of 10 of us, she texted out and was like, hey guys, like I made this spreadsheet of like what days were available with our kids, what days were available just for girls' night, whatever, you know. And immediately I had so much anxiety about this spreadsheet, because I was like, great, just another calendar for me to put work into. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh no, I have to plan and think of these things, which is hard to even think of scheduling anything in our lives past like a month. It really is hard to think in the future. Immediately I was like, hey, great idea, but it's hard for me to plan out that way. And she had the most brilliant, perfect response. She's like, actually, Courtney, ideally, I want everybody else's dates so we could turn around and say, hey, can you do this date, this date, this date? Oh, all right. This I can do. And it was the first time that I felt somebody else took the load off.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, because it's such an invisible load, too.
It is. It is. I don't want the pressure of feeling like I have added things on my plate. You know, nobody wants the pressure of feeling like you have added things on your plate at all, no matter your situation. But I really am tapped out pretty much any time of any day. I'm usually tapped out. So it was just a really special moment. It was the first time that I was like, oh, this is like so cool, because everybody's schedule is in here and I could just be like, okay, this is what they're planning. I could like jump in and kind of try to figure it out. Granted, it's still way easier for them to plan anything, but it was just like a really pinnacle moment in my girlfriend's relationship. And it really does matter when somebody helps kind of participate in that with you.
Yeah. I have gotten really good, for the most part, about asking for help. It's like the only way that I can really stay sane. And then I've turned mostly to my mom. But I have gotten so good at asking her for help, because otherwise I would drown. And I think that that's the thing, is that people don't realize, if they're not involved, how much work you need to do for other people to have a good time.
Yes.
Even if we just go out for a weekend to like my in-laws, or if we see my sister, or if we see my parents, like just to literally walk out of the house is so much work.
It really is.
For everyone else to not see that and to enjoy all of the fruits of your labor. Yeah. Right?
It's so true. It's still worth it, but
it's still worth it. But I think, like, kind of like what you're saying, Courtney, is I think that it's really important to, like, have some sort of validation when you're going through that, especially from people who aren't, right? I mean, just, like, leaving the house and going somewhere, if whoever we're visiting, if they even just say, like, oh, you know, I really appreciate this so much. I know this isn't easy for you. God.
Yeah.
Like, it's already worth it. I'm not, like, I won't say it's not worth it. It is, but it makes me feel so good and so valid, because let me tell you, there are times that we leave the house and I'm like, why the fuck did we leave the house?
I would say that
right?
it's like a 50-50.
Yeah, it's definitely 50-50. So that just helps a lot. And I, you know, if any listeners are out there that, you know, you're wanting to know how to better support your friend or your sibling or you know, whoever that has a disabled child, like, just that little bit of validation can go a long
Huge way. Like, I'm shocked at how much I would just appreciate someone being like, dude, good job. Like,
good job. Yeah.
I would be like, thank you very much.
But and like without the whole, like, I don't know how you do thing. Like, without
the
any
pity,
you know,
without the
not the pity. Like,
but it's true. Like, it's so true, you know. And we travel a lot, and in many cases, it's really very much unseen, because it's just between me and, you know, Stefano and the kids. You know, meaning nobody else is really witnessing us traveling. When we do travel with family, and they're really just like, you fucking rock it, man. And we're just like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you.
You're right. We
absolutely do. We did this. And that really does mean a lot, because you know, when I drop off Luca to be babysat, or, you know, or if someone comes to watch him, and let's say Lino's at school or Lino's doing something else, whatever the case may be, it's so easy to walk out the door.
Oh God.
Like,
right?
it's like, oh, you know what? Like, there's some fruit in the fridge. There's a few pouches over there. Hey, if he gets cranky, there's microwavable mac and cheese, you know?
Right? Yeah.
Like, it's so easy to do that with Lino. One, just to get the support to do that is complicated, but to do that with Lino is like, oh, I got to prep this med. You got to do this at this time. This happens. And it's not to say that all those things are awful. It's just to say that the process of leaving Lino in someone else's hands versus Luca is really eye-opening at how simple it could just be like walking out the door. You're just like, peace, bro.
Yeah,
See you later.
Not exaggerating. I made a 40-page medical journal for Cyrus when I went into the hospital for 2 days to have a C-section with Alden.
I did the same exact thing. It was the first time I made a medical binder.
Yeah, me too. And I was like, I'm gone for 2 days, but, you know, everything's here. And it's literally like, I'll get up and grab my keys and leave Alden with Grandma, and I'm like, bye, see ya. Yeah. And it's crazy. I mean, that, you know, we're really lucky that my mother especially can handle both boys. You know, she knows the ins and outs of Cyrus, which is great. And, you know, the same with Alden. And there's also the difference of anxiety levels, right? It's like, if I leave Alden, I'm like, you're good, you know, maybe you get a little overly tired and that's it. If I leave Cyrus, I'm like, oh my God, please don't have a seizure while I'm gone, or don't choke on your secretions.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah, yeah.
When I made the medical binder, when I went in to have the C-section for Luca, it was like, okay, I did this for this specific thing, but in the back of my head was like, I should have done this sooner anyway. Yeah. Because realistically, at any point if something were to happen to me and Stefano, or, you know, one of us or both of us, and somebody needed to step in, Lino's care is that complex that it's not like you could just walk in and be like, all right, I got this, like, we're all good. You can't. Yeah. And there's all those idiosyncrasies, right? Like all the little things that you do along the way during the day that people don't even pick up on, but they're so specific to your child and how you work with your child every day. You know, all those little things, and just to have them in one place to be like, okay, someone else can pick up kind of where I left off. God forbid anything were to ever happen.
I have to update ours, but yes.
I haven't updated ours either. So all this talk about being prepared, I am not prepared. So there you go.
Hey, listeners, if you have a medical binder, then now might be a good time to update that.
Now is definitely a good time to update that. You're welcome.
Let's bring it past that, right? So then we're talking now about the second kids, right? And then you start to see this other shift, right? If you're in an interabled family, or you decide to have another kid, there's this weird shift that happens. And I remember I mentioned in our episode with Jamie, when I told everybody that I was pregnant, everyone was shocked. As if it was an accident, right? Like, did you plan on this?
Why would you do that on purpose?
Why would you do that? You already have a disabled kid. But everyone was really shocked. Totally act like it was an accident. I don't know if you got this. But I remember from multiple people getting asked if the baby was healthy, and if there were any genetic things that Cyrus had, which, like, Cyrus's disability is not from genetics.
No,
it's
there's
from a
no
birth
genetics
injury.
involved. Yeah, and even if there was, it's still inappropriate. I have to say, both of those things I experienced. I had the not flat outright shock of like, oh my God, you're having a second child, but you just felt the vibe. I don't know if that makes sense, but like you just felt people were looking at both Stefano and I like, are you guys nuts?
Yeah.
And then I constantly throughout the entire pregnancy got is everything healthy? Everything looks okay? And
it feels dirty.
Oh, it does. And I kept like reiterating everything was perfect the first time.
Yeah, it felt so dirty. And I really hated that question. And I hated how people acted. And the thing is that these kids are so deserving of siblings.
Oh, 1000%.
It really shocks me of how many people don't think that Cyrus deserves to have a sibling just because he's disabled, or that his sibling doesn't deserve him.
Or that we don't deserve to have more children just because we have a disabled child.
Yeah.
Or that, especially after I had Luca, people would say, after seeing the way the family dynamic grew and how Lino's relationship with Luca grew, people would be like, I'm so glad you did this. It was like they were the same people who were giving you the face when they found out you were pregnant.
Whoa, my gosh, 100%. 100%. Like, we hear all the time now people being like, oh, I get it. I get why you did it. And it's like, what? Or people just being like, oh my God, I love seeing their relationship together and I love seeing their bond and it's so beautiful. And it's like, yeah.
They're siblings. Yeah. It's They're different.
Siblings. They just see each other as exactly who they are. And gosh, I really think the siblings could teach the world a lot. Just to see how Alden interacts with Cyrus and how Cyrus interacts with Alden. It's effortless. It's just effortless. There's never Alden thinking Cyrus can't do things. I really think, he's still so little, but I honestly think, like, he's just like, oh, with mom and dad, anything's possible. And I wish other people would see that. And just to have that on Cyrus's team, like, just to have more people on Cyrus's team, like his brother, would be amazing.
It really would. It genuinely would. And I wish it didn't have to be a situation that some people needed to see it in the flesh, needed to see, interabled siblings together to understand that. That's very complicated and very isolating as parents. I mean, I still struggle a lot with that, when we're talking about how people see two interabled siblings. Yes, before they were born, there were some people who just didn't understand how that dynamic would look. And then after they're born, they're like, okay, like, I get it. Look at this. This is beautiful. This is amazing. But they still treat them differently. You know, they still don't treat them equally. Obviously, this is very generic statement. I'm not saying everybody. But there is a lot of situations. It goes both ways where either Luca is receiving all the attention or Lino is receiving all the attention.
Yes.
It's like, it's really hard to find this like balance. Although I would say the majority of times it is still people will engage more with Luca, especially strangers. Like strangers will always be like, oh, what a cute baby. And then like Lino's right there.
I do see that a lot with strangers. I think closer to us, I don't necessarily see that. We deal with a lot of weird projections put onto Cyrus, right? I think that we deal with a lot of people who just feel bad for Cyrus because he can't do what comes so easily to his brother. And so because of that, I see that it's almost overcompensated with Cyrus. It really makes me upset sometimes because then, poor Alden's sitting there being like, hey, me too. And it's like, I constantly try to drive it home. This is how animosity is going to develop. I think that that's really another thing that families have to pay attention to, and parents, because it's like you said, Courtney, like we start with, people treating our kids a certain way or having grief over a certain thing, and then you go and you have a second kid, and then that grief just manifests into something different, which can look like overcompensation for the disabled kid. And, I don't want to say ignoring the non-disabled sibling, but certainly not making as much of a to-do. And I mean, we deal with that a lot. And I really have to sit down and I have to tell people, like, listen, it's gotta be equal. Cyrus gets so much attention all the time from Kyle and I for the smallest things, right? Like, he'll be in therapy and he'll stand for 5 seconds and we're all screaming and hooting and hollering. And then Alden goes and takes his first steps and we're all like, yay, woohoo, good job. Other people are there and they're like, oh, Cyrus, yay, woohoo, yeah, Cyrus. And I'm like, oh, yes, but, they get their moments individually and then they get their moments together. It wouldn't be fair to Alden to have these big moments for him, or even the small moments, have to be spread out between the both of them. And then Cyrus goes and swallows safely, and we're all hooting and hollering for him, and then Alden just, gets ignored. And that's really this like fine line of making sure it's dispersed evenly with these kids, because Alden's getting older and he's starting to pick up on things a lot. It's almost like I see things that he's starting to do and how he's cheering on his brother. And it's so sweet, right? It's like every morning and every evening we have Cyrus help us push his syringes down for his medication. And Alden has started to clap for Cyrus. And it's this like, oh, it'll melt your heart. You know, he's now doing it for Cyrus, but we have to do it for him too. And that's why it's really tricky, because there is still a lot of grief from other people, and it is very much so just manifesting in a different way. And I think a lot of times Alden gets left in the dust because of that. It's not fair. I don't know how it's going to look as Alden gets older and starts, you know, walking up to people or asking for them or this or that. I don't know how it'll look. I know right now it's a little messy. To say the least.
I often think about the same exact thing. You know, I myself, even still sometimes, I naturally navigate my attention to Lino, even if it's just because I'm just trying to keep an eye on him medically.
Yep.
I don't even realize I'm doing it myself.
Yeah.
And so when I notice, and I have to put in that extra effort to be sure that I'm not letting Lino's disability or Lino's medical status interfere with how I'm viewing my kids.
Yeah.
I think about that, and then I think about everybody else has to be going through a similar thing when they're interacting with my children, because the people in our lives are acutely aware of Lino's medical conditions and his disability, and it really is complicated for everybody close by to ensure that there's equal attention to the kids, you know, that it's not this... I don't want Luca to ever feel that his brother's a burden, or that his brother has to be the primary focus all the time. That is not how families work. There is never one person in a family that is more important. There is never one person in a family that deserves more of anything, for that matter. And we all go through periods where, yes, maybe there's a little bit more attention on that person in a family. But I don't want that to naturally be that Luca grows up thinking that he's just the afterthought.
Yeah, and I think the same can be said where you don't want Lino to think that he's the burden.
Yes,
of course, yeah. And that's what's so important. And that's why, like, what you say in front of your kids is so important, too. I mean... It's kind of, if we're talking about relationships as a whole, it's very similar to things that we deal with in school. One of the first IEP meetings that we ever had before Cyrus was actually attending, and they were like, oh, you know, the other kids are so good. They're so helpful with the disabled kids, and they're so helpful. And there was such an emphasis on it. And, like, listen, if you're raising your kids, raise your kids right? And... everyone who's a decent human is going to be helpful for their friends, right? I'll help you, Courtney. You'll help me. Neither of us are disabled. Like, you know, I help my husband. I help my friends. Like, to put this emphasis on it, and I have to shut that language right down, because we dealt with that a lot at the beginning of the year, where it's like, oh, so-and-so's, oh, I think she really likes helping him out, and I think she really likes... And I'm like, no, listen... Is my kid helping her out? Like let's talk about that too. Let's make this language even and equal. Yeah. Because Cyrus will live his entire life having somebody there to help him. He does not need to have his friendships have this caregiver facade over them. Yeah. And
that's not a friendship.
It's not a friendship. I mean, friends help friends, right? If I held the door open for somebody, like, are you going to make a big stink over it? Or
now you're best friends with that stranger?
Yeah, or is that only reserved if I hold the door open for somebody who's got a wheelchair? You know, it's like you just do the decent thing. And we dealt with that a lot, and it was a very, like, correcting the language of Cyrus doesn't need his friends to help him beyond how friends help them. He'll always have that. He's got a nurse. He's got me. He's got his dad. Like, he'll always have somebody there. And if he goes through life, especially early on like this, if this is ingrained in him that anybody who has a relationship with him is helping, he's gonna feel like a burden.
Yeah.
Keep it equal, keep the language equal. You know, it's same with, you know, my boys. Like, I don't want Alden to feel any sort like he's burdened, but I don't want Cyrus to feel like he is a burden, because it's neither. Yeah. It's neither. No. It's so far from the truth.
You know, we're talking a lot about how exhausting it can be as a parent and a caregiver in these situations. And this is just another added layer of the complexities we have to think about in terms of all the relationships in our lives, whether it's us with other people. Lives. Yeah, whether it's our kids and the people around them. You've mentioned to me before as well, the relationship between like therapists and the kids. And
that's tricky too.
It gets really tricky, you know, because these kids do fall in love with their therapists. They get very close, and there's this feeling like a friendship is brewing. You know, they spend a lot of time with their therapists, especially when you're doing intensives. You're doing these like grueling 3 weeks, and you're kind of leaning on your therapist a little bit. You know, we watch our kids kind of lean into them and be like, okay, like, you're my...
They become their safe space.
Yeah, exactly.
During a very unsafe mentally situation for them.
It really is, you know, but that's also really dangerous, because then it's like their quote unquote friend is being ripped from their lives.
Yes.
Or their quote unquote friend is making a demand. There's so many different things that just as parents, we are constantly evaluating every relationship around us. It's incredibly exhausting.
It is, yeah. And I think about that all the time with like therapists and teachers. It terrifies me sometimes, right? Because Cyrus has a one-on-one nurse in school. He adores her. He looks at her the same way he looks at me. Like, she is his safe space. And she's such a good advocate for him. I cannot speak better about this woman. I love her too. But it genuinely terrifies me that he's building this relationship with her and this level of trust, and she could just quit any day, or she could be fired any day, or they don't renew her contract, or somebody else comes in, and this and that. Yeah. And it's this very dangerous situation that we start getting into with our kids, of this revolving door of people. Yeah. When it comes to friends, when it comes to classmates, it's like, these are your friends. You can love the other people. The other people are here for you. They're part of your team, but your friends, they're not here to take care of you beyond taking care of your friend. You know, how a friend takes care of a friend. I just worry it'll cause some mental health issues later down the line, and trust issues and all that.
I'm sure there's going to be some level of trust issues as these people leave our kids' lives. I think that's just human nature to feel loss. They're going to grieve these therapists, these teachers. I think on some level, all kids kind of go through similar with teachers and things like that. I also think about the added complexity of the relationships we create with the therapist. Yes. And I don't know about you, because my spicy 4-year-old, he gets mad as hell when I start talking to his therapist. And let me tell you, sometimes the therapist is the only adult I have spoken to in 6 days. And I am like, hey, what's up, adult human being? And Lino's like, what the fuck, mom? I'm doing PT, you know? And I feel like that, and I feel like that's uncomfortable too. And I often think about, like, this poor kid's like, shut the fuck up, mom. Like, this is my time. This is my therapist. This is my friend. There's even that added layer that I see happening, you know, because these people that are part of your child's life due to their disability or their medical needs, they do become part of your life too.
They become family, honestly. Like, I always say, we see Cyrus's therapists more than we see our own family.
Oh, that's so true. Especially
Yeah.
when I was in early intervention. I was like, dude, you're
Yeah.
you're in my house more than my own mom.
Yeah, and they know, like, they know a lot more.
They know so much more. It's like really bad. Like, the fact that like all my inhibitions sometimes go out the window, and I'm like, Jesus, I just unloaded my whole history. Meanwhile, my child's like, I'm just trying to stay in here, man. Like, you know, it's like so bad. But it's hard. It's really hard. And, you know, I have to say, like, outside of our HIE moms group chat, I really still always feel like an outsider, except when I talk to good therapists, like Lino's therapist, not even like psychoanalysts. I'm talking about like physical therapists. I'm talking about speech therapists. Like, that is the only other time that I genuinely feel like a safe space.
Yeah. I think it's so complicated just all the way around. I think we're all kind of trying to navigate that, and I don't know that there's a right answer or a wrong answer.
No, I agree with that. I think some of the key points, because there really is no right or wrong, I just think is you got to set your own personal boundaries. You got to be able to not focus on carrying other people's grief, focus on your own grief.
Yeah.
I think you got to be able to be creative, get inclusive, involve the others in your life to also be inclusive. I think there's just so many different things to talk about from this. I know we will do other episodes that sort of isolate a little bit more of what we're talking about here, these sorts of relationships. We're definitely going to do an episode on spouses and partners because that is, whoo, I don't even know if we can handle that in one episode.
In one episode?
But we'll start with one. We'll start with one episode and we'll see where that goes. Everything in my life in terms of relationships, how I view them, whether they're mine, whether they're my kids, everything has changed. Everything has been uprooted. The way I approach everything is different. And there's so much that you have to carry. You really do. You have to carry a lot.
You do. And you can't let anybody hold you back from your healing, because your own personal healing is critical to your child. Holding other people's grief, if that's holding you back from accepting the normalcy that your life looks like, because it doesn't look like everyone else, but it's still your own normal. If having outsiders come in and they're harming that thought process for you, you can't do it, man. You gotta put up boundaries over that, because that's not what it's about. The acceptance of what your version of normal looks like is really what everyone has to get to. It's not easy. It is not an easy place to get to. But when you're dealing with other people's shit over it and their sadness for you and your child, it's just going to hold you back even more.
And it will affect your kids. It will totally affect your kids.
Yeah.
And not in a positive way.
No.
It's going to add so many dangerous layers to the relationships they build if you don't show them what healthy relationships look like. If you don't teach them what the boundaries are, it's going to be so hard for them.
I mean, you see the older generations of disabled folks talking about this, and you know, we really have to learn from them. I mean, how many people are out there being like, I have so much internalized ableism because of shit I had to deal with growing up. And it's like, so we can't do that. We can't do that to our kids.
No. If there's anything, and I hope we learn more than this, but if there's anything we can learn from the previous generations, is that we can't do that.
No.
We have to show them that the world is bullshit sometimes. It's fucking bullshit. And they don't have to take it. They really don't. No. They don't have to take it. They don't have to let it affect them. They could see it for what it is. You know, in some situations, you can't protect them from everything. You can't protect them from the world.
No.
No matter who you are. You cannot put your kids in a bubble and pretend like the world is not fucking shitty.
No. I mean, I say to Cyrus all the time, I tell him that people are going to view him certain ways simply because of who he is. And I'm like, Cyrus, fuck him.
I always tell Lino, I'm like, just fuck him, Lino. Just
fuck him, Cyrus.
Fuck
like,
you,
whatever.
fuck
Yeah, who cares? They're worthless to you anyways, Cyrus. Throw them out. Yeah, I do not want my kid to have to wear kit gloves for other people. That's not what it's about. I am not raising well-behaved children. But I want my kids to be so disgustingly proud of who they are.
As they should be.
As they should be, right? Because they are just such incredible human beings. And I don't ever want Cyrus to sit back. And I'm sure that day will come where he compares himself to other kids, but I don't want to be the reason he does that. Yeah. And I don't want anybody that's in our immediate life to be the reason why he does that. And one thing that I always tell him is that every person is different. Every single person on this earth is different. He's different than his brother. His brother's different from him. They're different from me. I'm different from their dad. We are all different human beings. And just because Cyrus does something different doesn't make it better or worse. Gosh, Cyrus's life is going to look so different than Alden's, and there's kind of this beauty to that, I think, because it really does drive it home that every single person is different. If Cyrus ever sits there and has a thought comparing himself to somebody else, I really hope he sits back for a second and says, well, this is just how we're different, and that's okay.
It is definitely okay. If there's anything you take away from this episode, 1, work on your own mental health, please, because in order to create a safe space for your kids and your family, and in order to encourage healthy relationships, you have to start with yourself.
Yeah, and create healthy boundaries.
And then start projecting that shit onto your kids, man. Start teaching them all the good stuff. Start teaching them that we are different, and start teaching them that it doesn't fucking matter. And start teaching them that normal is some bullshit word.
It doesn't even exist.
But you can't do that. I have to say again, you cannot do that until you yourself are in the right headspace. So start with yourself. Start with the immediate relationships in your life and the immediate relationships you have, whether that's with your spouse, whether that's with your parents, your siblings, whatever the case may be, the people that are pretty much every day in your kid's life, start with those relationships and within yourself. Create those boundaries wherever they need to be made and however they look, but be sure that whatever those boundaries are, that you are creating an atmosphere, an environment around your children that is fostering a healthy perspective on life and a healthy perspective on themselves. It comes from essentially leading by example. Please, if you're listening,
put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can take care of everybody else.
That is the point.
That's the point.
That is the point. It's really the truth. We probably say this more than we need to, but it's not like Brittany and I came out the womb with these sorts of enlightened ideas. It took us a while to get to where we are.
Listen, guys, I paid a lot of money for therapy over the last 4.5 years. I'm trying to help you from having to pay the same amount of money so you kind of just get free therapy of things that I've learned. You're welcome.
We're just going to guide you. You don't even need a therapist. We're your pseudo-therapist.
Courtney and Brittany, we're just here to save you money on Bitching and Bolusing.
Oh.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed everything that we had to say. I hope it resonated a little bit. You're always welcome to leave us your feedback. We have a website.
Yes.
So go to www.bitchingandbolusing.com. We have a little section where you can leave reviews and tell us what you think. And we have another section where you can contact us if you have questions, if you want to be a guest here. We are always looking for new guests to come on.
Always looking for guests.
Always looking for guests. So, yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe for future episodes. Previous episodes can be heard on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. If you like what we said, please be sure to give us a share. You can follow us on Instagram at Bitching and Bolusing. And you can visit us at www.bitchingandbolusing.com.